thank you all for coming out today to the Institute for Life Course in Aging and to our bi-weekly seminar series that we have every year. I do want to let you know that we do have a few more seminars, and just in particular, I want to point out that we were going to have one 2 weeks from now, but Dr. Barry Gold is unable to attend that week, so we have him instead in March, on March 18. So just in case you had other old information, I hope you're aware that he'll be here on March 18. We are very pleased today to have with us Dr. Ardra Cole. Her colleague, Maura McIntyre, will be here shortly. She's teaching in Zoom. And they are here today to show us about exhibiting research. They have done a lot of different displays around town. I've been to the one they had at the CBC building quite some time ago now, and a more recent one last year at City Hall. And they have a very interesting way of perceiving research and exhibiting it. So I'm very much looking forward to Ardra's talk today. We're very happy to have you back.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for coming, and I'm hoping that the technology cooperates and we can move through this smoothly. I always have to anticipate the worst with technology. Just by way of beginning, in the announcement that went out, we did say that we were going to provide a bit of a virtual tour of the exhibit and then spend some time talking about what it means to exhibit research. So we will get into that and have some images of an exhibit and slideshows and so on. Before we do that, though, I think it would be helpful to provide a bit of context and backdrop to the work. So I'm just going to provide some overview to the work that we do and just kind of set up the tour by way of talking about the research that the exhibit was based on. So. Maura and I have been working in the area of caregiving and Alzheimer's disease for more than a decade. We came to the work through direct experience. Both Maura and I lost our mothers to the illness, and so we do have direct experience of what it means to care for somebody with Alzheimer's disease. And being researchers, we then took that commitment, passion, direct experience to our work in the university and developed a program of research on caregiving and Alzheimer's disease. So for the last 10 years or so, we've been fortunate enough to be funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada for several different projects. The one that we're going to share with you today is called Putting Care on the Map, Portraits of Care and Caregiving Across Canada. The people who are in the room have some materials in front of them, and they will make sense as we go through some of the slides. And there are some other materials in the room here behind me that I will explain. So I'm going to, before I get into the actual virtual tour, I'm going to just set up the research, set up the exhibit by describing the research. So bear with me while I go through some kind of dry background stuff about what what we did and where and how and so on, and then we'll move into the tour. So our research, our whole program of research is really about better understanding the emotional complexities of caregiving for people with Alzheimer's disease. What that means in the deepest sense, and how we can, as a society, better understand and support family caregivers. So our work has 5 purposes. One is to learn more about what care looks like in different parts of the country to different people in different care circumstances. We also have a very strong public education agenda to our work. The title, Putting Care on the Map, is very purposeful. It's both the title of our project, but it's also it also states our agenda to raise awareness and to advocate the importance of caregiving. So we want to educate the general public about Alzheimer's disease and the complexities of caregiving. Our work also, because it involves family caregivers, both as participants and as, quotes, consumers of the work, our work is intended to provide a form of community development and support for family caregivers. We situate our work also within a broad commitment to contribute to an ethic of dementia care that is person-centered. And we strive to inform healthcare policy, healthcare education, and healthcare professionals. And finally, perhaps most important, we have an explicit purpose of paying tribute to family caregivers and to the worthiness of care and caregiving in general. You'll see in a minute how those purposes play out, and hopefully when you see the way that we do what we do, you'll understand why we take them up that way. So in the research project that we're going to be talking about and sharing with you, Putting Care on the Map, it is a cross-Canada study, and it had two primary components, or two primary participant groups. One of them was family caregivers across the country who are caring for their loved ones either at home or in long-term care facilities. And then we had a more focused element to our project where we worked more in depth with family caregivers in three areas: in Halifax and rural Nova Scotia, in Sudbury, Ontario, and the near north of central Ontario, and on Vancouver Island, in the northern Gulf Islands, and mainland British Columbia. We gather information in our research in a variety of ways to try to access information that may not, and experiences that may not be so easily accessed with conventional means. So in this project, we did, because of the breadth of it, we did create a survey and gathered general kind of demographic and information about caregiving and the circumstances of care that people were situated in across the country. So that was kind of the broad family caregivers, and you'll see what we did with that information. And then when we worked closely with the family caregivers and the in-depth work, we worked with 40 family caregivers in those three areas I mentioned. And with those family caregivers, we had in-depth interviews in various places, in their homes, in libraries, in coffee shops, places that were either places of respite for them, or we were invited in their homes and had in situ interviews while they were continuing to care for their loved ones at home. We also involved photography in our work as both an information gathering strategy and also, as you will see, in representation. We did that in two ways. One, we took portraits of each family caregiver, and this is part of our paying tribute agenda. And you'll see again where those portraits show up. So all of the family caregivers in the project agreed to have their photograph taken, and we've created a portrait gallery of them. We also, as we traveled across the country, the vast country, wanted to put our research in both in a Canadian context, but also speak to the rhythms of life and death and caregiving in the seasons across the Canadian landscape. So we did a lot of photography of the landscape of Canada. For each of the family caregivers we worked with in depth, we also gave them disposable cameras, which were generously donated to us by Kodak. And we asked them to take pictures at their leisure of what care looked like for them. So we gave examples like perhaps care means spending time with your loved one in a favorite place. You might take a picture of that, take some photographs of that. It might mean spending time doing a particular occupation or recreational activities. It might mean that you had to adapt your home in special ways to accommodate the physical needs for your loved one, and maybe that's what care looks like. It could be a whole range of things. So we left the cameras with the caregivers and gave them envelopes, self-addressed stamped envelopes, asked them to mail them back to us. We developed them and then had follow-up conversations with them by telephone about the photographs, and they'll show up in the exhibit. And then finally, to also kind of get at experience of caregiving from a different angle, we asked family caregivers to come forward to us with a symbol of care, an object that, for whatever reason, has personal meaning to them and symbolizes care and or a care relationship. That too will show up. So I'll ask you to keep those in mind, those different kinds of information or data in mind as you see the exhibit. The work that we do is situated in social science research, and I'll just pause very briefly to explain the kind of methodology that we follow. Because in our work we intend to move out into communities, to communicate research to diverse stakeholders, to broad audiences, and most importantly to family caregivers and the general public, we draw on other than kind of conventional means of conducting our research and representing that. So we draw on a variety of art forms in our work so that we can make the research that we do more accessible and so that we can better capture and communicate the complexities of what it means to care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease. So our work is arts informed by the arts, and in this case you'll see predominantly a focus on installation art. Our work is also very purposely centered in communities, so that while we speak to academic and scholarly audiences, mostly we're interested in speaking beyond those audiences. So we conduct our research with a community development agenda, hoping to educate, inform, involve, and mobilize in some ways people in communities. There is a strong quality of ordinariness and everydayness about our work, and we do that purposely so that we can communicate in a whole variety of ways to different communities. So after we gathered all of the information that we did, that we have, we sat down, as you would do in any kind of qualitative research, to analyze that. And so we immersed ourselves in a very extensive and intensive period of analysis, thematic and otherwise, and worked to create this exhibit that you're about to see. We represent our work in ways that are both where the representation of form emerges from the analysis that we're doing, but also with very specific purposes in mind of communicating with diverse audiences. So with our intention to put care on the map and to exhibit and present portraits of care and caregiving across the country, we created the exhibit. The exhibit you're about to see consists of 11 multimedia individual pieces that emerged from the analysis of different kinds of information that we gathered in the project. One of the challenges that we'll talk about later has to do with the portability of the work, and this work does not happen to be very portable, as you will see. Because our home base is in Toronto, and because of the size of the population in Toronto, we decided that we were going to begin or launch our exhibit in a very prominent public venue in Toronto, and we chose the Toronto City Hall Rotunda, which you see on the screen. We choose public spaces to exhibit our work for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is that we want passers-by we want our work to catch their attention, and we want them to stop for a short time or a long time, perhaps return to engage with the work, and in so doing to become a little bit more aware of and informed about caregiving and Alzheimer's disease. So we choose public venues like malls and city hall spaces and nursing homes and libraries to catch those people who don't specifically set out to view the work. But we also do a lot of public outreach. So we advertise through all forms of media. And so some members of the public do come to see our work specifically. And we also, when we put our work in public places, we never know who's going to come, but we hope, we cross our fingers that a great diversity of people will engage with the work, and they will tell their friends, and so on, as the commercial goes. So we set up in City Hall in September this past year, and our exhibit was there for about a week. We hosted the exhibit, meaning that we had an opening reception. We had dignitaries of the Alzheimer's Society and from City Hall, and we had a celebratory opening. And then we, Maura and I, and Maura is just coming into the room now. Maura and I spent time at the exhibit every day, hosting the work, and we also had volunteers hosting the exhibit, and people would come by and spend time with the various pieces, and we would talk with them or not, depending. And we're always very surprised to find out who comes. And you'll see we have a bit of a slideshow of audience engagement so that you can see the diversity of the people who come to the exhibit. So I am going to actually move into that in 1 second. So here, if you're coming through the doors of City Hall, you will meet the exhibit. You will enter the exhibit through an information table where we have a banner for our project, Putting Care on the Map, Portraits of Care and Caregiving. This is our information table. And I'm going to pause, give you a sense of the movement through the exhibit, and then Maura and I will kind of take you through a virtual tour, one piece at a time. Okay? All right. Escape.
I don't know where I am, view is unfamiliar, and from where I stand, nothing's looking quite as it should be. I thought I'd been here before, I clearly have a memory. Now I can't be sure, maybe in the morning, can't you see the signs telling us to turn? We'll be fine once again. Someone will help us find out. Where are the sounds I know? The air is thick and heavy. Is this the path we chose? Is this where the directions say to be? Have I paid close enough attention to the details? Do I know myself? Seem a lot of questions. Can't you see the signs telling us to turn?
as Ardra said, one of the things about exhibiting research in public spaces is that you can anticipate some of whom will come, but then there are complete and utter surprises. For instance, at City Hall, many people passed by our exhibit who were on their way to get married in the chapel. And so suddenly we'd be seeing the bride and the groom and the assembled family, all sort of looking at our exhibit but distracted because a very large event was about to happen. Similarly, there were a few classes that came to see the exhibit that we had prearranged and organized, but there were also one class in particular that came just by chance. A teacher, an ESL teacher, saw the exhibit, realized that there were a lot of objects but also a lot of text, and that it was a great learning tool. So she brought her class and actually spent an entire morning with her class at the exhibit, not for purposes necessarily of learning more about caregiving and Alzheimer's disease, but as an opportunity to be in a big open space and to speak and to have something to engage with.
So we'll launch into a tour of the exhibit piece by piece. Whoops, sorry. All right. So there are 11 pieces to the exhibit, and we're going to just kind of take you through them one at a time. One of the things that you'll see in the exhibit is that each piece has a title and what we call an artist statement. And that describes the connection between the representation that we've done and the research. You don't necessarily need to engage with that text, but it's there for people who want to access that as a way of learning and engaging. So included on the artist statement is a list of the materials that are used to create each of the pieces. So here we have, for everything, there is a season. Oh.
For Everything is a Season is, as you can see, a whole series of photographs of the natural landscape in Canada. Pictures of rocks, flowers, skies, leaves, close-up images of things that we all see all the time and that give us comfort. They also remind us of that which is at the base of all of our experience, which is the natural environment. We chose to include these pictures because we did traverse the country with our work in individual interviews, but also through our survey, and we in some way wanted to provide a very broad backdrop of context, and to sort of get at the ever changing nature of the season, and how that change is in fact a constant, which I think for many caregivers, where change is also a constant, is a comfort. The photographs are mounted, as you can see on these, well, not quite in that picture, but maybe in the other, you can see that they're mounted on a series of stumps and logs and mounted on foam core.
The next piece of the exhibit, What Care Looks Like, is in fact partially present in this room with us. What Care Looks Like consists of a number of very large foam core panels on which are adhered numerous photographs in kind of collage form. And if you remember, when I was describing the way that we gathered information, one of the ways was to provide caregivers with disposable cameras. Well, this is where the photographs they sent us show up. When they did send the photographs, we engaged in a process of kind of clustering and sorting and meaning making and so on. And strangely enough, or not so strangely, when we saw the clusters and the themes that emerged, it spoke to us of the work of a well-known dementia care theorist whose work we very strongly connect with, and that's the work of Tom Kitwood. And he has has advanced a framework of dementia care where he identifies the needs of people with Alzheimer's disease. And those needs were very much reflected in the photographs that were sent to us. The other thing that was reflected and that we really wanted to put forward in the representation was that most of the emphasis in literature on caregiving and certainly in public information is about how caregivers can survive the demands. But our experience has been on our own, from our direct experience, but also with the many caregivers we've worked with over the years, is that while there is a coping mode, most people are really interested and do rise to the challenge of moving beyond coping. So we did get the coping photographs, but we also got the other photographs. And so we mounted them on created these collages. They're very large panels that you can actually move into. And the fabric panels that you see behind us here were created to name each one of those panels. So we see Kitwood's framework of dementia care needs: identity, occupation, inclusion, comfort, and attachment, checking myself on that, as ways of moving beyond coping in providing care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease. So this is the exhibit that's represented here, or the theme that's represented here. And here's the actually a close-up of the collage of coping. And so what you see are adaptations that caregivers make. They've built fences, they've roped off areas for purposes of safety and security. They've adapted areas of their home. You see a lot of kind of mobility devices, gadgets to make caregiving a little bit more efficient, easier, safer, so they can kind of get beyond that and engage in kind of at a more complex level of care. And here's a close-up of one of the panels, comfort, looking very comfortable.
The next installation is entitled A National Snapshot of Caregiving in Alzheimer's Disease. As Ardra said earlier, one of the ways that we gathered information was through a survey. Alzheimer's societies across the country helped us to distribute the survey through their support groups and through information sessions. We also had the survey mounted on our website so that people could access our survey directly from their homes through the web. We had good response and wanted to render the results of the survey in a way that, we rendered the results from the survey in a variety of different ways, but we kind of, we wanted to address the needs of people who are more used to looking at information in more traditional ways, so that we did want to provide some charts, some graphs, some statistics from our learnings and present them in a more typical way. So some of the questions in the survey had to do with, where are you caring for your loved one? Is it at home or is it a long-term care facility? What is the relationship between you and your loved one? Are you a daughter? Are you a wife? Are you a son? Are you a daughter-in-law? Are you a stepdaughter? So a whole variety of questions in the survey that we represented in a variety of different ways. But in a national snapshot of caregiving and Alzheimer's disease, what we chose was to reproduce maps of the country, as you can see, There's a variety of different maps of the country, and then on the salmon-colored piece of paper in the upper right-hand corner of each, we have the results that we got back from the survey that we've posted in fairly traditional ways. Now, one finding from the survey that was really striking was that Ardra and I asked as a question, what was your most significant learning as a caregiver? What is the quality? What did you draw on? And people resoundingly named patience. So that on the other side of our survey results, we just put a big map of Canada with the words patience, because it does seem that caregiving teaches Canadians patience.
Focusing care is another representation that emerged from our survey results. One of the questions that we asked of people, this was an open-ended question, was so to list the variety of care needs or care roles that they played on a day-to-day basis with their loved one. So that would mean anything from helping with mobility needs, to feeding, to being a companion, to helping to drive the person, to providing medication, to a whole range of care needs. And we really got a very lengthy list. And one of the things that became clear to us as we were working with that material was that the more demanding on the caregiver, the less able the caregiver seemed to be to kind of keep in focus other than those day-to-day responses to, the responses to day-to-day demands of care. So what that made us think about was the Snell Eye Chart. It's that creative process when one thing leaps over to another, and so if you think about the Snell Eye Chart, and you can remember the big E on the chart, it's in large font, large size, and it's very easily attended to. And then as you move down the chart, it's harder to keep in focus those letters. And and at some point, when the demand on your eyes gets so great, you can no longer see what's below a certain point. And so we adapted. We made an adaptation of this Snell Eye Chart, and we created our own focusing care chart. And it has a little legend, and I'm not going to ask you to try to figure it out. I'll just tell you a little bit about each of those letters stands for something. So for example, F is for feeding, B is for bathing, G is for grooming. So those are the kinds of day-to-day demands of care that are so much kept in focus because they can't be ignored. And that's what, over time, takes up caregivers' attention. If you look down to the end, to the bottom, you'll see, if you can, in smaller print and somewhat blurry, the letters L, P, O, C, and so on. And those letters stand for love, patience, occupation, companionship, encouragement, understanding, reassurance, and so on. And it seems like the greater the demands of care, the harder it is to keep in focus those very complex and in-depth qualities of what it means to give care.
The next installation is the Alzheimer's Alphabet, Self-Care from A to Z for Family Caregivers. And it is also a rendering of our survey results. One of the questions that we asked family caregivers in the survey was about self-care. We asked people what they do for self-care, how they manage to keep up with their own needs while focusing on the needs of another as a full-time job. We got some remarkable responses, and many of the ideas were big ideas. Ideas that are hard to follow some of the time, but which are really important. They're kind of like guides. So Ardra and I thought, well, how can we take these really big ideas and distill them in a way that will be useful to other family caregivers? So what we decided to do was to create a little book, and it's called the Alzheimer's Alphabet, and we've got a few copies that we can just pass around so that you can have a look at. And we took the tips and techniques and ideas about self-care that family caregivers came forward with and clustered them and used the alphabet as a construct. So for instance, A is adjust your expectations, life has changed. So H is honor what you know, and M, one of the M's is make things fun. So we wanted to put all the tips and techniques in a little book, which we did, and then for purposes of the installation, we created a very, very big book. So this is a floor-sized foam core rendering of this book, which comes up to about my waist, and gives a sense of, we hoped, the importance of self-care, that it is really vital and it is at the heart of the ability to carry on.
One of the larger, I think, and more ongoing pieces of this exhibit is called Gray Matters, a collective remembering of care. And if you remember in describing the information sources, I mentioned objects, artifacts, symbols of care that we invited family caregivers to contribute to us. Well, this is where they show up in our work. Gray Matters got its start several years ago in our first exhibit when we noticed, well, we had a place for it for people to leave mementos, share responses, perhaps share a thought, a memento of care. We noticed that they were very eager to do so, and we started to gather, amass, a collection of care. And so we had this idea that this collection was going to grow. It was going to be a living collage, and we would continue to help it grow as a way of both honoring care and a way of understanding care. So Gray Matters, and you would have seen in the audience engagement slideshow, you would have seen some people engaging with this. It's a large, you might even think about it as almost a museum collection. It's a collection of all of the objects that we have collected from caregivers across the country over the last 8 or so years. These are people who were participants in this research project and people who have actually seen our work exhibited in other places and wanted to contribute something to the collection. People who have responded to an invitation on our website and have sent us something for the collection. So this is a piece that continues to grow, and you in fact have a flyer, people who are in the room have a flyer about Gray Matters there, and you'll see how we are inviting it to continue to grow. But so similar to our work with photographs, we gathered this collection of objects and spend time with it, with the objects, sorting them, clustering them, trying to understand how they fit together and how they wanted to be presented. And so to date, we have 6 clusters that define the collection we call Gray Matters. There are objects that cluster together that symbolize caregivers, intentions and work to preserve the identity of their loved one. So, for example, you see here, you can see in the background what is a police officer's uniform shirt. You can see a mannequin with a fancy dress on it. One of the other shots, perhaps, there we are. You see a nurse's cape, a trunk. This cluster contains objects, mementos, memorabilia that caregivers have shared with us because they're ways that they define and preserve the identity of their loved ones. Another cluster related to the way that caregivers, through their way of making sense of the illness in some ways, the work that they do to pay tribute to their loved ones and to remember them. So in the foreground of this slide, you see a bit of a workstation. You see a lap desk, writing desk filled with notes and poetry and photographs. You'll see photograph albums and these very elaborate scrapbooks that people have created. Lots and lots of poetry people have written. Photographs with tributes to loved ones. There's a whole cluster of those. You'll see also on the left, on the other side of the screen, on the floor you'll see a lot of plush toys. And that is part of a cluster that of objects that define people's identification of the care relationship in terms of the adaptations they make. Objects that symbolize changes they've made or changes that have happened in the care relationship that are new because of the illness. So you'll see things like several medication, those pill boxes to try to keep track of medication, alarms or security systems, a tape recorder, plush toys that seem to have a very strong presence in the life of people with Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers. So there are a lot of things related to the adaptations that people make. There's another cluster that signifies the attention that gets paid to routine, ritual, schedule, and the keeping of appointments. I believe, yes. So there's a whole cluster of diaries. People have given us very detailed diaries that they've kept. Meal plans, menus, appointments, schedules, various ways in which they've been spending time, kind of monitoring the progress of their loved ones' health and illness, and so on. So we have a large cluster of those kinds of objects. And then there's also a cluster that is the most abstract cluster in our collection, but in some ways it's the one that is the most complex. And those are the objects that people have contributed as symbols that define the quality of the care relationship. So you'll see in the background a lamp. that was contributed by a family caregiver in her, because she wanted to represent the guidance and the light that her mother stood for in her family, and that was her way of remembering her mother and honoring their care relationship. There are symbols, there are cultural symbols, there are very deep personal, emotional symbols and artifacts that people have contributed. You might have seen the dog on the side there. A dog will show up again. Animals have a very significant role as companions in the caregiving relationship, and so that's part of the symbol. And then there's another cluster off to the side that is actually not in any of the images here, which is a magazine rack that contains information that people have given us, clips from newspapers that have covered issues related to caregiving, or perhaps done stories about them and their family. And so we have this whole cluster of information about caregiving. So this is Gray Matters, and this is part of a project we'll say something a little bit more about later because it continues.
The next installation is called Love Stories About Caregiving and Alzheimer's Disease. And as part of our effort to make our research findings broadly accessible and available to a wide public audience, Ardra and I decided to make a CD. And this is what it looks like, and I'll pass it around for people to see. And I'll just tell you a little bit about how we came up with what's on the CD. One of the things that we've been struck by over the years through our in-depth conversations with family caregivers is the storied nature of what we were hearing. People were telling us stories, and they were intimate, interesting stories about care and creativity. We decided to take those stories and, loosely following the trajectory of the illness, so beginning with diagnosis, moving to adjustments, self-care, to loss of recognition, to stigma, to the labors of love, we decided to take those stories and to write a script. And in order to fulfill the requirements of a previous project, Ardra and I actually performed that script. It's a spoken word performance. And we performed it in Sudbury and in Halifax and in Victoria. We then thought, well, that was great, and we were able to perform that script for those community audiences. But how could we get those stories, which did seem so vivid and vital, and told stories about caregiving that caregivers really seemed to relate to? How could we get it out to more communities? So with the help of a professional playwright who took our script and adapted it and reworked it for professional actors, we reworked the script and thought, well, how could it be packaged for a CD, for an audio CD? And so then we hired a variety of professional actors and recorded the stories in its new scripted version in a recording studio on the Toronto Island. So I'm going to just play you a little script, but before I'll just suggest that at the exhibit, we thought, well, how can we present this audio CD at the exhibit? And we ended up creating what we called a kind of listening lounge. And there it is. Canadian Tire was generous enough to loan us a whole variety of furniture. We had these lovely rugs and black leather couches so that people could go into the space, sit down, and turn on the CD and listen to the voices of actors, but telling the stories of family caregivers. So here, I'll just give you a little bit of a clip of that.
He came back and he said, "The doctor said there's nothing wrong with me. He says I'm fine." So then I began to think, well, maybe it is me. But you see, if you really have Alzheimer's, you don't think you have it. If you think you have it, you don't have it.
When my partner was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, he said, "Now, we're not telling anybody." He felt there was a stigma attached to it, a sense of shame. He thought people would say he was crazy. So we tried to keep it within the family. It was the hardest 10 months ever. But through the support program at the hospital, they taught us to deal with it and be open about it. Tell your friends, they said. They are your support group. Well, I waited and waited for him to tell his singing buddies. Finally, one day he came in and said, "I told Merv." It was just like a weight was lifted off of me. We could be open about it. No more trying to make excuses.
The first time I admitted my husband had Alzheimer's to someone outside the family, I was picking up the mail, and my neighbor opened the window and said, "Oh, hi, June." We talked a bit, and then she said, "You're awful quiet today." And I just burst into tears. She came right over, and I told her. It was just what I needed, because now somebody other than the family knew. You see, I had hidden it out of respect for my husband. He didn't want anybody to know.
My husband used to cram before his doctor's visit. He'd say, "It's a cinch. I did that all through the Air Force. I know how to be persistent." The doctor would ask, "Who's the Prime Minister of Canada?" "That guy Clinton," he'd say, "the good-looking man."
When you look at the screen, you'll see the listening lounge, and you'll also see what we call a portrait gallery. And this is the next part of the exhibit, and we call it Who Cares? Who Cares, if you remember from the description of the information that we gathered, that we took portraits of family caregivers. Well, there we are. These are ordinary Canadians across the country who are caring for their loved ones at home, in long-term care facilities. And it's part of our intention to pay tribute to them and to the worthiness of care. So they agreed to have their picture taken and to be included in the portrait gallery. And so in the exhibit, we situated the portrait gallery such that when you're sitting in the listening lounge, hearing the voices of family caregivers or their stories, you're also surrounded by their faces. It's very powerful. And so we have more than 100 portraits right now, and this is these portraits also are available on our website. And we continue to invite family caregivers to either have us take their portrait, or if they would like to contribute to the gallery. And again, it's our way of paying attention and putting care on the map. You also get a sense of the diversity of care relationships, the various care roles that people have in the family.
And I should just add that who you're looking at are all caregivers, even though you're seeing people in pictures together. They are not the person with the illness, they're a care team. So bottom right is a mother.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay. Bottom right is a mother and daughter, and then there are two sisters and there's a husband and wife, for instance, and those are care teams, people who wish to be photographed together. The next installation is called Caring Canines, and I'm going to let you talk.
Well, when we received the photographs that people took with their disposable cameras, one of the things that we noticed was the number of photographs that included family dog. And we knew from our own experience how important companion animals are in the whole care relationship, not just to mention general family life. And so the photographs are included in the collage, one of the collage portraits. But we also felt so strongly that they needed the role of companion animals needed to kind of stand alone because they did seem to have such a special place, not only for the caregiver but also for people with Alzheimer's disease, so that they provided companionship, they provided psychological or physical security. Animals created opportunities for physical interaction, for social interaction. When communication becomes increasingly difficult, animals don't demand the same way that we do, and we all know that the important role that touch plays in our health and well-being. And so the role of animals in caregivers and in the lives of people with Alzheimer's disease is, we think, fairly understated, and we wanted to kind of overstate that a bit. And so, excuse me, and so we created freestanding sculptures based on the pictures that we received. So here we have our pack of Caring Canines. And these are created from the pictures, and they're made of heavy corrugated plastic so they're over-enlarged, traced, cut, and they each one has its own stand. And they're there in the various positions, and they're in different shapes and sizes, and they symbolize the important role that dogs, in this case, play in people's lives. The other thing, the choice of the white kind of ghostly color is important because mainly the animals stand as silent sentinels. In some of the commentaries that people sent us with the photographs, they weren't necessarily intending on taking pictures of the family dog, and they would say, "Oh, there he is again. He's just always there. I didn't see him." And so there was just this ever kind of sense of presence, but a very silent and significant presence. So. And there we have a shot of a dog-level shot of the Caring Canines. And then, second to last,
the next installation is Welcome to My World. And in research terms, Ardra and I wanted to provide a kind of phenomenological rendering of a caregiver's experience. We developed really quite intimate relationships with some of the people that we interviewed. People were inviting us into their homes. We were having long discussions about, intimate issues to do with care. And we wanted in some way for the audience, for people who attended the exhibit, to have some of that experience, to be able to enter the world of care and caregiving. So what we did is we created these 3 distinct different carols out of plywood. They sit on a table like this, and there they are. That's the outside of them. And we decided to sort of feature the stories and lives of 3 of the caregivers that we met. So there's the interior of one of the carols. A person coming to the exhibit then has the opportunity to sit down, to look through a photo album that shows really what care looks like for a particular person, to put on the headphones and listen to that person's voice talking about caregiving. And, you know, maybe they're telling us a particular story, maybe they're talking about a particular challenge, like bathing, for instance. But you hear the actual voice of the actual person. On the back wall of the carol, we'd have a picture of the caregiver, and in this situation, it's a care team. There's 2 sisters and a sister-in-law. And then an artifact or emblem that the person contributed to Grey Matters that we then chose to feature in that carol that spoke to them of the caregiving experience. Also, on the left and on the right, respectively, in the carol, a short description of the care circumstances. So how old is the person that they're caring for? How old is the caregiver? Where are they? Are they in a rural environment? Are they in the middle of a town? Is there a lot of family support? So on and so forth. So kind of a sketch of the caregiving circumstances. We also included some pieces of writing that some caregivers gave to us in the carols. So we were really struck when we mounted Welcome to My World in a public space, how, you know, there we are at the busy rotunda of Toronto City Hall, and there are these various exhibits and I should say pieces of our installation that comprise the exhibit, and then, you know, people going to work, people going to get married, people going to get their parking permit, you know, busy space. Welcome to My World allowed visitors to our exhibit to sit down and go inside and enter the interior world of a caregiver, to put on the headphones, block out the exterior sounds, listen to the voice, look at the pictures, and really travel into the world of care and caregiving.
Our final piece, again, comes out of the survey information. And the question we posed to family caregivers: what particular tips, techniques, and strategies about caregiving would you like to share with someone in similar circumstances? So, if you recall, we used this information to create the Alzheimer's Alphabet. We also used some of that information to create this piece of the exhibit. And it's a very simple, but we think and hope a long-lasting piece, because as you're exiting the exhibit, we invite you to take some words of wisdom away with you. So we have those, simple but very powerful, very strong messages that family caregivers gave to us about caregiving, words of wisdom to other caregivers, and we put them on little pieces of textured paper and folded them and sealed them, and each one had a lovely little stamp that we had made for them. And so you could dip your hand into the goblet and take out a little a word of wisdom and ponder that and carry that forward with you with care. And so we wanted people to actually have something tangible to take away from the exhibit with them, which would remind them about the importance of self-care as well as the importance of care and caregiving in general.
So that's our kind of guided tour of the exhibit, and Ardra and I have a few pre-prepared kind of issues and opportunities to talk about with respect to the research process in public spaces. And I'm realizing I'm getting ahead of myself. We were going to talk about the Care Cafe. Should we wait on that?
No,
Or
we'll
do you
do
go,
it
go for it?
quickly.
Okay,
Yeah.
you go for that, and then we'll
Okay.
open it.
And we're very unabashedly taking advantage of the webcast audience in this regard, because the project that we're currently involved in is called the Care Cafe, and it extends our work on understanding caregiving and Alzheimer's disease. But in this case, we're exploring a particular modality of caregiver support, and that is what we're calling the Care Cafe, which is an adult show and tell. And we're working with local chapters of the Alzheimer's Society across the country. We're traveling to 27 different sites, 3 in each of English-speaking provinces. And with the help and support of the Alzheimer's Society, we're inviting family caregivers to come bring a simple artifact of care with them. And we'll have a conversation circle in a cafe-like ambiance. And we'll kind of do a show and tell, talk about caregiving and their care experience through the object. And that object, if they so choose, then would become part of Grey Matters, the collective remembering of care. So we're getting that project underway. We've been to a place in Ontario, we've been to 3 places in Manitoba, 3 places in Saskatchewan. We're lining up the rest of the tour for the remainder of this year. And if there are people in Alzheimer's societies or elsewhere in any communities who might be interested in hosting a Care Cafe, by all means, contact us. Our information about, all of our information about the project and about the Care Cafe is on our website, and we would love to hear from you. So, back to you, Maura.
So I think that in the interests of time, instead of Ardra and I leading with some of our ideas about exhibiting in public spaces and research as installation art and some of the opportunities and challenges that we faced in mounting this work, perhaps we could just pause and give you the opportunity to ask questions or make comments or share your reactions to our work.
Sure. Thank you for this. It seems very interesting. I just want to say, this project, you collected it first to see the training of caregivers, then to raise the awareness among the care population. Yes? Did you have the chance to measure the magnitude of the effectiveness of this project, or not yet? And then another small question. Those caregivers, they feel ashamed when they answer the questionnaire. They answer whether ashamed or guilty or frustrated or embarrassed.
Your question is a beautiful setup for us to describe a grant that we're actually applying for right now. One aspect of that grant substantively is about stigma and how difficult stigma is and how many family caregivers suffer from the broad stigma about mental illness and about mental illness combined with aging together, which is Alzheimer's disease. So absolutely, we had a lot of responses about stigma and the complexity of stigma. In terms of measuring the success of our research exhibit, we have lots of we have a lot of positive soft data about that. And we have, as well, a lot of, kind of random frequency counts. Lots of people saw the work. Lots of people engaged with it. In our next project, one of the things that we want to do is understand in more detail and more depth how people come to know and how the alternative forms of representation, how the little book, how the CD, how exhibits in public space, how people learn and engage through these different mediums. And so we want to study that in more detail and more depth. Exactly.
The two purposes you just asked.
You're a plant.
I'm interested, and I've seen your work a couple of times now, and I always learn something new, so it's always really helpful. But I'm interested around, people have shared with you things that are so precious to them, their photographs, their stories, their artifacts, and what are the ethics of caring for those into perpetuity? What happens to all of the collection over time if the two of you opt to do something different? Where does it all go, or how does it all tie together?
It's such a great question, one we ask ourselves on a regular basis. When we first started out, we thought about, I guess we didn't expect the kind of response that we were getting. We didn't expect people to be sharing with us, being so generous to contribute what they've been contributing, and so we didn't really understand the full impact of what we were asking. We were kind of being careful what we asked for, and so one of the things that we've taken to do now is borrow things and return them to the individuals. And in some cases, we do what we call ghosting of the objects. In every case, when we do the care cafes, for example, sometimes we leave the care cafes with the objects, but in all cases, we leave with photographs of the objects, and then we try to represent those. It takes a huge responsibility off our shoulders, in the care in perpetuity when that does happen. So it opens up a huge ethical issue, not to mention the ethical issues around quotes data storage. We have our work is crammed into nooks and crannies of our offices, of the building we work in. It's one of the issues and challenges, but it becomes increasingly important when you set it within the context of research ethics.
I would sense there would be a really heavy weight for both of you when someone hands you something that you need to take such good care of it, and how do you?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed hearing about how you engage the material with the public and how your work is out there. I have a question about the inside dialogue aspect of the work. So more the theoretical underpinnings of your work, and as a researcher household, and what language you use to attract funding from people and make sure. But what's the official? How do you deal with the theory aspect of this work?
Well, I mean, if you unpack the work that we do, it's you can kind of track it. I mean, it doesn't really look all that different from any conventional research. The representational form does, but the way that you talk about it doesn't need to. And so it's situated, substantively within the context of dementia care, a framework of dementia care theory. And so we connect our work most strongly with person-centered care and theorists around that, and this social and psychological complexities of caregiving. So literature is associated with that. And methodologically, our work within social sciences is situated within a fairly robust and rapidly growing body of work, methodologically drawing on the arts in research for purposes of knowledge translation. And a lot of funding agencies now, I mean, we didn't start out this way. we really have been able to get funding from the get-go. We've had funding for a good long time. But a lot of funding agencies now are feeling pressures of accountability and are developing mandates associated with knowledge translation. Doesn't necessarily mean what we're doing, but we kind of tap into that purpose. And so, when you really spend time with it, it doesn't really look all that different. The outcome in the representational form does, but it has, all of our grants have all of the elements of any conventional grant and can quite easily fit into the organizing kind of structure that's put forward for applicants to follow. Yeah.
We do have one question from our webcast
Oh,
audience. They say, great work, thank you. And would you be extending your work to include the person with dementia per Kitwood's framework?
And I can respond to that. And so far in our work, we have solely emphasized caregivers. That has been the focus of our work, and we haven't had the space really to extend beyond considering care and considering the person with the illness beyond their relationship with their caregiver. It's the relationship that we've been most focused on in our work so far. Thank you. And there's another question for you.
Oh, yes, I just wondered, as caregivers were reflecting on the stresses, etc., did the issue of feelings or revelations about abuse ever emerge? And if so, I see this as an enormous potential for raising awareness and making caregivers feel it's okay to feel that you do have abusive tendencies, and a way to help them to recognize this and work through it. A lot of what you presented can easily be adapted to education around elder abuse.
And I think that that's part of the bigger focus on stigma, right? And in the CD, The Love Stories, which is based on our conversations with caregivers, there are a number of stories of experiences of abuse, and while we call that part of our work love stories, we mean love in very, very complex ways. Mm-hmm. And so the complexities of love, including issues of abuse of various kinds, in a caring relationship, are portrayed in the stories, and we do hear of those issues, and they're really, it's really important to include those in the kind of goals for destigmatization and awareness, not only for public education but also for caregivers. Yeah.
Also, some stories are included about a caregiver who had a complicated relationship with the person who now needs care, and who was perhaps abused by the person who now needs care. And how does that person reconcile that reality with the demands of caregiving? How emotionally complicated is that? So, from a number of different things.
Would you encourage to empower them? Would you encourage the caregivers to empower the patients and their loved ones? Because same thing like those people who are quadriplegic, or they can empower them and use the holistic approach. You encourage this kind of thing with them also?
Well, I think within the context of person-centered care, I think that the notion of empowerment is integral to that way of thinking about responding to care needs.
Absolutely, and encouraging caregivers to, draw out the capacities of the person who is ill for as long as possible. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. We have our own little memorabilia to
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you all
Thank
for
you so
coming.
much for coming.